Our first presentation of the Waste Management Symposium, presenting on the NT Circular Economy Strategy. Friends, can I please get you to clap your hands and stamp your feet from the Department of Environment, Climate Change and Water Security? It's Leonie Cooper.
Okay, so thanks, Amy. I guess following on from that, my greatest success in the last 5 years is actually to realise this strategy. It's something that we've all worked really hard towards, a lot of hard work within our agency to get to that point, but also across all the local government areas, NGOs and communities. So in that light, I might get on and go forth. So the other biggest success story for us is that our department's undergone a restructure lately, which has resulted in the formation of a dedicated circular economy team within the Environment Division. So what that means is I've actually got 4 FTE now to focus its resources on driving the implementation of this circular economy strategy. And as we go through it, you'll come to realise that it's a mammoth task, and I guess those 4 FTE will be working very hard to try and facilitate as much as we can. So if we go back a number of years where this all really started, in 2017-18 there was a ABC program, War on Waste, which generated a lot of national interest around the national waste policy. What came out of that is a revised national waste policy which focused on keeping waste out of landfills as long as possible and in the economy as long as possible. So that resulted in 7 ambitious waste targets and 79 specific actions on how that's going to be delivered by 2030. Some pretty ambitious ones. Every state and territory has signed up to it. We've all got an obligation. Communities have an obligation. Local government has an obligation. And for us, it's like, well, how do we do it? You know, we're not going to get any more money here in the territory to actually do this stuff, so how do we make it happen? Just to put that into further context, we're only about 1% of the national waste. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, well, if we're only 1% of the national waste, then why do we have to do it? Why do we have an obligation? The fact is, if we don't do it, then we're going to run out of space, we're going to end up with health issues, we're not going to leave a legacy for our future generations that we really want to. And more importantly, we miss those economic opportunities to turn waste into a resource. The Territory has the lowest recycling rate in the whole of Australia. I think last 2018-19 it was 19% of all waste generated in the Territory is recycled. So that represents, if you flip that on its head, significant opportunities here in the Territory. So we know by looking at that graph, when we look at our waste, where those opportunities lay. We know that they lay in construction and demolition waste. We know that it resides in commercial and industrial waste and municipal solid waste. If we tackle those issues, that'd be 95% of our waste. Like, everyone talks about a circular economy, but what does that actually mean? If you break it down realistically, it's about keeping it out of landfill and in the economy as long as possible. But if you look at all the different aspects of where that can happen, there's multiple chances for that to occur. So, for example, in the household, what can we be doing? Can we be turning our organics into compost for the garden? Can we feed it to our chooks? Those sorts of things. I guess if we move back up the food chain a little bit, some of the small businesses, our health precinct, for example, how many single-use plastics do you see wasted when you go to a GP clinic, for example? What opportunities do they have to potentially make a difference? Our schools, the amount of waste paper, the amount of biros that get thrown in the bin, printer cartridges, those sorts of things. We need to be starting to think at the level, what can we do to be able to change some of these thinkings? It's not always going to be on local government or governments. It's everybody's responsibility to do something about their waste. Why aren't we working? So we are doing some stuff, and we are doing it quite well. So, for example, the container deposit scheme in the Northern Territory has an average return rate annually of about 80%. So that means 80% of all containers sold into the NT as part of that scheme get returned back to the beverage suppliers. That's pretty awesome. That's just normal business these days. People do it as a matter of process, whether they chuck it in their yellow bin or whether they take it to a depot. Our e-waste, I mean, this is an area I think that we can be doing more, but people are taking unused air cons to facilities, their TVs, their computers, their vacuum cleaners, those types of things. If we create those opportunities to make it easier for people to take their electronic waste somewhere, then potentially those product stewardship schemes can improve. I've pinched a few photos here from various people, so thank you to those. We're already starting the process of turning our construction and demolition waste into usable road base. We're turning, our organics into compost. There's opportunities there. We're turning tyres into crumb. Potentially we're not using as much that we should. We're turning some of our plastics, our polypipe, for example, into chips that can be exported for use. So we are doing some things, but there are many, many other opportunities. Isn't that working? So if I break this circular economy strategy down into really its core components and what are we hoping to achieve from a government perspective in the next 5 years, we've got the 3 strategic priorities that Minister Moss alluded to. The first one, protect the environment, no-brainer. If we keep waste out of the environment and we have strong legislative frameworks, then I guess our ability to protect the environment is great. So in this sense, this is where my department sits a lot of the time. We're in the process of reforming the mining legislative framework to ensure that environment protection from mining activities is stronger. It will come across under the auspices of our government, under our department. Commitment under the circular economy strategy to ban problematic single-use plastics by 2025, and my team is actively drafting a discussion paper that can get the thoughts and the conversations happening. We do our day-to-day statutory functions, the licensing, the compliance, the enforcement, and that's about making sure that all the regulated community, and that means everyone, is doing the right thing. We do the impact assessment, the environmental impact assessment. We service the NT-EPA. So I guess one of the other big things that our department's been working on is the strategic environmental assessment for Middle Arm. So we've heard a lot of talk about developing Middle Arm as a manufacturing precinct. Of course, government's concerned that whilst we're going ahead with development, we're not destroying our sensitive environment. So this strategic environmental impact assessment is actually looking at what are the risks to the environment in Middle Arm in particular, and more broadly Darwin Harbour, which feeds into a broader piece of work that my team's been working on in developing a wastewater framework for Darwin Harbour. We're also having a presentation later on this afternoon, or a workshop this afternoon, on waste levies, and we're also reforming the container deposit scheme, as Minister Moss said. Under strategic priority 2, this is where, how do we actually start the process of transitioning? What does government need to do, or what are the levers that government can can pull to make it happen. And a part of that is, well, what are our objectives? What are our principles around circular economy? We go back to that original slide. What is a circular economy? What does it mean for the territory? What does it mean for business? What does it mean for local government? We need to start that conversation, and soon. No good having principles if you don't have a framework in place to actually measure if we're making progress towards transitioning towards a circular economy. I guess the other big lever we have is procurement. Government is the largest procurer in the Northern Territory. So as part of that process, we have the opportunity to embed in that procurement policy recycling targets. It's no good having recycling targets if we can't provide the source material required to comply with those targets. So it's a bit of a cart before the horse type thing. We need to work out what are those targets, what are cost effective to industry, because the last thing we want to be doing is basically shutting up shop for small industry to establish. Product stewardship, the whole aspect of how do we make those product stewardship schemes, like for e-waste, for solar waste, for tyres, for batteries, how do we make them more effective and work here in the territory, particularly in regional and remote communities? And I suspect in the next little while we'll hear a little bit more from the Productivity Commissioner around the right to repair. How many things do you go and buy these days that 2 years later they're dead and you've got to chuck them in the bin? Where are the days where we used to take our radio to the local electrical place to get it fixed? People should have that right to do that, not manufactured so that we have to throw them in the bin as soon as they break. So I guess this strategic priority area largely sits with DCMC, so Department of Chief Minister, and DIT and DIPL. They're the three big agencies that are really driving this area. The third one is, how do we realise the opportunities? Yeah, they're there, but how do we make them happen? So Minister Moss talked about the NT Recycling Modernisation Fund. This is $3.8 million. Available to local government, councils, not-for-profits, what have you, on a co-contribution basis to install recycling infrastructure to process glass, plastics, paper and cardboard, tyres. And this is in direct response to the coag waste export ban. So get your thinking hats on. It's not like you just have to be a sole applicant. There's opportunities for partnerships and collaborations. The funding, although available for issue this year, can be spaced out over 4 years. So just put your hats on. Think about where those opportunities may lay for you. The other big area is the materials recovery facility in Katherine, or the Big Rivers region. That request for quotes went out last night, midnight, so that's a big project that will look at the needs and the requirements of that region to support a materials recovery facility. It will look at where our wastes, how do we get them out of communities, what are the volumes, the economies of scale that are required to run a materials recovery facility. What are the options for running a materials recovery facility? Is it a joint venture arrangement? Is it government owned? Is it basically an EOI for industry? I mean, all those things are on the table, and that is going to be a great piece of work. So that project will be completed by October, which will then kick off into stage 2, which is around what are the technical specifications for the design of this thing. So this is money that government is investing in building this thing. So there are lots of other opportunities within DIT for officers there to help the development of business cases and funding applications and industry development models. I suggest you reach out to them, contact them. They're waiting to hear from you. So, yeah. definitely working. So if I'm going with the theme of the symposium this year, what do we need to do as a collective to set our own agenda, and what are those opportunities? From my perspective, when I think through where local government, industry and NGOs have a real opportunity, actually start to think about what are those strategic approaches for waste and recycling. And so where do those hub and spoke models fit in? Do we need another landfill? Do we need to be focusing more on keeping waste out of the landfill and turning those products into something else? I heard what Con said. It's a huge issue for the top end in particular, but it's been a huge issue for regional remote communities for such a long time. We've got increasing housing development in regional remote areas. Where does that waste go? How do we get them out of communities? What are those partnerships? I guess the other thing is just getting together in a room every year and talking about where we've come from. I mean, I think back 5 years when the first one occurred, and I think the discussion has shifted. It was all legacy waste back then. What are we going to do about legacy waste? Well, I think the discussion's moved on to about how can we think more strategically about getting waste out of communities. And so for me, that's a big, big step forward. The whole concept of how do we engage communities in the waste and recycling discussion, how do we build capacity, how do we change community behaviour, those discussions markedly different to the first waste symposium, so I think that's a great outcome. In terms of procurement, you guys have the opportunity to influence as well. You guys are the other big procurer of activities in the Territory, whether it's through your office stationery supplies, whether it's your roads, whether it's anything, you know, you can put these targets in if you want. You can choose to accept recycled content in your procurement. You guys fund activities as well. Is there opportunity to say, sorry, this is a zero plastics event? I guess looking at your local opportunities for recycling, can you provide accessibility to the container deposit scheme? And there's lots of councils here that have done that and are probably one of our biggest suppliers of containers in regional remote areas. There are opportunities for employment in those communities through the container deposit scheme, and they're all on strategic collaborations, backloading with the suppliers, what have you. I guess the other big thing is Boomerang Alliance has implemented the plastic-free places here in Darwin. Is there opportunity for something similar to be rolled out in a community-wide level? So I think there are lots. I guess where I see Legant has a really clear role to play here is at a strategic level where land tenure, particularly for landfills, is an issue. Is there an opportunity to collectively deal with the issue with the land councils at a more strategic whole of government level? So I just really want to quickly give you a bit of a prelude into this afternoon session on waste levies. So as part of the strategy and as a part of the National Waste Action Plan, Northern Territory Government has committed to look at the costs and benefits of implementing a waste levy in the Territory. There's no hard and fast views on what that looks like or whether it should happen or it shouldn't happen, should happen or shouldn't happen. However, we've contracted an independent party to do this work for us. So PricewaterhouseCoopers will be in this afternoon running a workshop. This is your opportunity to put your views forward about what are the costs and what are the benefits of a waste levy for the Territory. Where should it be applied if it is applied? How should it be applied? Where should that funding go? So Government has no fixed views at all on this. But basically, out of all these stakeholder consultations, what PricewaterhouseCoopers will do is pick two of the most preferred options and run the economic analysis over it. What does that actually look like for the territory? And that will inform advice given to Cabinet later in the year around all these findings. So this is a real opportunity for you guys to put on the table your thoughts on a waste levy and how it could work for council or not, and what is that impost. Think strategically around what does a waste levy actually look like? What would its purpose be? Where would you apply it? What would be the advantages of applying it at a certain point in the supply chain? How do you avoid the impost on councils and communities and people? I guess that's probably enough from me.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Can we have a round of applause for Leonie on the first presentation?